Recording in progress. The voice has spoken. Okay. No, that's the wrong button. That would be detrimental. Okay, let's click that. Okay, I think we're good now. Fine. Okay. Thank you all for coming. This is exciting. I'm not going to say it's an exciting class. It's a very interesting class. It's exciting. Usually there's a lot of, actually it is pretty exciting, but it's really relevant, and I think it hits home for a lot of us, or actually I think all of us to one degree or another. A very important lesson in tonight's lesson, if that makes any sense. And it's going to be very, very fascinating. So let's get into it. Okay. A new dawn breaks. When we're at our lowest point, we must look up at the pitch dark. Is that grammatically correct? But it's fine. At the pitch dark heaven, and remember, tomorrow the moon will shine again. Okay, so a little introduction. Why did King Saul's reign last just one generation while King David's lived on? How do David's roots from Ruth the Moabite become an advantage? And what does this have to do with the second Chabad Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe? Class on light and darkness, dealing with addiction, and the spiritual gain that grows out of challenges. This is based on a talk from the Rebbe that was that the Rebbe said in springtime or early summer 1964. Okay. Almost forgot. Let's start with a little charity. Almost forgot. It's always important to start charity. If you have a charity box at home, if you're watching, please, if you have a box, put it in the box. Which reminds me, if anybody would like to sponsor a class, there are sponsorship opportunities available. Whether you have a bar mitzvah, a birthday, a wedding, whatever it is, you want to sponsor in merit or in honor of someone, or a yard site, or you just enjoy what is going on here, then you can reach out to me at rabbi@jewisherie.com. Okay. The more the mitzvahs, the better. Okay. We're starting on page 3 in your book. What's the relevance? Section A. Barry, you please start.
The Rebbe, when the day before Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the new month, is on Shabbat, there is a unique feature in the service. The Haftorah, beginning with tomorrow, is the new month. We need to explain the connection between the content of this Haftorah and the eve of Rosh Chodesh. As a rule, the content of Haftorah is related to the content of Torah reading. The reading of the Haftorah was originally enacted when there was a decree against reading the Torah. As a substitute, they would read from the prophets a chapter related to the weekly Torah reading. This custom remained even after the decree was abolished. On the eve of Rosh Chodesh, however, the Haftarah associated with the Torah reading is set aside in favor of the Haftarah. Tomorrow is the new month.
Okay, just for those who are, I'll say, not yet aware, here's a traditional service how it looks like on Shabbos, on the Sabbath. There's the regular prayers until the Amidah, the Shema, then the Amidah, standing prayer. After the Amidah, when there's a minyan of 10 Jewish men, that means I just said 10, right? We read from the Torah scroll. And every week we read the next portion of the Torah. At a certain point in history, we'll get to the background of it a little bit in a second. It was enacted to read the Haftorah. The Haftorah does not mean the half Torah. A lot of people, it's a misunderstanding. The word is actually pronounced properly, as you see here, Haftarah. It's we call it Haftorah also, but it's practically, but it's not half Torah. We'll see in a minute. It means like a pause or a stop. So, on Shabbos, 7 people will be called to the Torah to read from the Torah. And then afterwards is read the Haftorah. The Haftorah is a portion from the prophets or the writings, not from the 5 books of Moses, which in a certain sense reflects the ideas that are presented in the Torah portion. When the day following Shabbos, like this month, is Rosh Chodesh, meaning the Shabbos, the next day, Sunday, is going to be the first day of the new month of Sivan. Okay, we're currently in the month of Iyar. It's going to go to the month of Sivan. So that the first of the month in Hebrew is called Rosh Chodesh. Rosh means the head, and Chodesh means a month. So the head of the month, the new month. So when that happens, when the first of the month falls out on a Sunday, so the previous day on Shabbos, the Haftorah that is relevant to that week, to that Torah portion, is kind of set aside. We don't read it. Instead, we read a particular Haftorah, which we're going to learn about now. What's called Machar Chodesh, means tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh. So let's go to how is a Haftarah selected? Michael. This is written by Rabbi Elio ben Asher Levita Ashkenazi from the Sefer HaTishbi. If you want to see who this person is, you can look at a little blurb on the side. Go ahead.
I will explain the history behind the Haftarah, according to what I have read. Antiochus,
That's good enough.
the wicked, the Greek king, decreed that the Jews may not publicly read from the Torah. So the Jews chose a chapter from the prophets that bore similarities with that week's Torah reading. Nowadays, although the decree is no longer stands, custom remains, and we read the chapters of prophets following the Torah reading. It is called the Haftarah, meaning pause.
Excellent. So this was instituted in times of Antiochus, the wicked king Antiochus, was the guy from the Hanukkah story, actually. Times of when the whole Hanukkah story where the Greeks entered the temple and they purified everything, impurified. I didn't say purified. They made everything, they contaminated everything in the temple in Jerusalem. Defiled, thank you. I was looking for the right word. Then that king who's behind all that, Antiochus, he also is did not allow Torah learning. That's like part of the Hanukkah story. That where we spin the dreidel on Hanukkah, the little top. The story behind that was that whenever the Jewish kids were learning Torah, and they saw Greek soldiers coming, it was totally illegal to learn Torah. So they hid the scrolls and they put out the little tops and they started playing. Like, oh, what are you doing? Like, we're just playing a game. I said, okay, fine. That's okay. That's kosher. Well, I'm sure they didn't say kosher, but so when it was enacted, it was a decree that the Jews are not allowed to learn or to read Torah. They were allowed to read from the writings of the prophets. So it was instituted that as a replacement, a temporary replacement until this decree is over, we're going to read parts from the prophets instead of the portions from the Torah, but they should be relevant to the Torah portion. Let's read about the exception. Let's read source 2 as well. This is from the Code of Jewish Law.
When Rosh Chodesh is on Sunday, the Haftarah on the preceding Shabbat, as Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is the new month.
Okay, and read source 3 as well. One more. This is from the Book of Samuel.
Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is the new month, and you will be remembered, for your seat will be empty.
Okay, so in order to get some background here to know what this Haftarah is talking about, we need to talk about these players over here. There's 3 people we're going to be learning about. King Saul, who is arguably the first king of the Jewish people. His son Jonathan, or Jonathan in English, and King David. David wasn't king yet, as we'll see in the background in a second. What his relevance was, his story. So Jonathan was King Saul's son and heir to the throne. David was a shepherd and a talented musician who had performed for the king before. David's defeat of the mighty king Goliath, the giant, his Philistine adversary, by the precise aim of his slingshot directly at his forehead, stunned the nation. David earned much praise and married the daughter of the king, Michal, as the king had promised for whoever would save the nation from the Philistines. When David, Saul, and the army returned from the war, the women came out from all the cities of Israel, welcoming the troops with a song. They sang, Saul struck thousands of men, and David struck tens of thousands of men. This planted a seed of jealousy in King Saul's heart. He only killed thousands, and David killed tens of thousands. David eventually became a general of the army, becoming increasingly popular, and Saul's jealousy grew and turned into a fear that David would seize the throne. Saul became depressed, and once when David was in Saul's royal chambers, Saul threw a spear at him. Miraculously, David dodged the spear and ran for his life. Meeting covertly with his brother-in-law, Jonathan, David asked him why his father wants him dead. What have I done to him, he asked. Jonathan responded that he hadn't heard any indication from Saul that he wants to kill David, and he's certain that that's not the case. It must be a misunderstanding. So David asked Jonathan to try an experiment, and that's where our Haftarah begins. This is the story of the Haftarah, or actually the part before the Haftarah. Tomorrow is the new month. That's what Jonathan tells David. Tomorrow will be the first day of the new month, and the king will be hosting a festive meal at the palace. I, David tells Jonathan, will be absent. And when the king asks where I am, you, Jonathan, will tell him, and that you gave me permission to visit my father's home in Beit Lechem. And we will see how Saul reacts. What was his logic? That if Saul responds calmly and sends David good wishes, that would indicate that David was incorrect in fearing that the king wanted his life. If Saul reacts in anger, that would prove that he is indeed trying to kill him. The experiment was carried out as planned, and when Saul hears that Jonathan approved David's absence, he is enraged. Saul, it says in the verse, Saul's wrath turned against Jonathan. He said to him, "You son of a rebellious woman, I knew that you choose the son of Yishai," which is referring to David. His name, David, son of Yishai, that was his name. "To your shame and to the shame of your mother. For all the days that the son of Yishai is living on the earth, you and your kingdom will not be established. And now take him to me, for he is condemned to death." So that's quite a reaction. So Jonathan is horrified to hear this, and he sees that David's fears were vindicated. He leaves the festive meal, and the next day meets David for a clandestine rendezvous, telling him of his father's reaction and advises him to flee and go into hiding. Emotionally, the two embrace and part in tears. The last words they exchange is Jonathan's wish to David: "Go in peace, for we have both vowed in the name of God that God will be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever." Okay. Sure, can you read page 4, the choice?
Page 4 of the red one.
Yeah.
The choice of this Haftarah appears difficult to understand. The eve of Rosh Chodesh is only mentioned at the beginning of the Haftarah. Jonathan said to David, "Tomorrow is the new month," but the entire continuation of the Haftarah, which is longer than the minimum necessary, didn't occur on the eve of Rosh Chodesh, but later on the first and second days of Rosh Chodesh. Moreover, the substance of the story, Haftarah relates, isn't directly connected to Rosh Chodesh, as it just as well have occurred at any time when a festive meal was held in the king's court and David was absent. We also need to understand the contemporary relevance of David and Jonathan many years after this happened.
So everybody's asking one major question and one more of a question that we should be able to learn from. Okay. If you open up the Haftarah, it's printed in the Siddur, in the prayer book. It's also in. We should get Chumashim, Torah books. We don't have those yet. If you open up the Haftarah and read through the Haftarah, this story, this is the Haftarah that we read this coming Shabbos. It's one that's relevant to, like we said, we push off the one that's relevant to the Torah portion, and we read this one that's connected with the fact that tomorrow, meaning the next day after Shabbos, is going to be the first of the month. What's the connection? Open up the Haftarah. 2 words. The whole thing is verses and verses and verses. There's 2 words. That's the connection, seemingly. Machar Chodesh. Hebrew, Machar Chodesh. Tomorrow is the new month. That's it. David tells Jonathan, tomorrow's going to be the new month. He's going to make a festive meal. I'm supposed to be there. I'm not going to be there. So let's see if he gets upset or not. And that's the whole outplay of the Haftarah. That's what happens. The day or two later on Rosh Chodesh, Saul makes a party, and David's not there. Where's David? He went to his father's. Let him go to his father's home. He gets upset. He gets angry. He wants to kill him, and so on and so forth. The only connection, seemingly, between the fact that tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh and this Haftarah is the fact that in the Haftarah it says tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh. That's it. So why do we need this whole long story for? Just let's read those 3 verses, whatever that mentions those words, and that's it. Done. The answer is going to be that the whole Haftarah is relevant to the fact that tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh, not just those 2 words. And this is going to be relevant to the fact that how does David and Jonathan play out in our lives today? What is the relevance they have today, many years after they passed? Before we go further, there's something extremely important we need to understand. When you open up the Torah, open up the Bible, and you see stories of people, And they do certain things sometimes that we question and we look and say, well, that wasn't very nice, or that wasn't very noble, that wasn't very heroic, that wasn't very kosher. And yet we know as traditionally, when you open up the Talmud, you open up different sources, these people are praised as the greatest, most righteous people. They're holy, they're pure. And a lot of people, they react and they say, but what do you mean? They weren't so holy, they weren't so pure. Just a slight perspective shift with an analogy that I heard recently. It's a famous story, but I'm not going to tell the whole story part of it. I'll just tell you the analogy part. There was a king, yeah, and he wanted a new crown. It wasn't a simple king. He was a prestigious king. You know, I mean, kings are in their own right, they're prestigious, but this particular king was very prestigious. And he asked two of his ministers to design for him a wonderfully noble, majestic crown with exactly the right jewels, and that would represent his kingship and just make it beautiful and deep and meaningful. Okay, so the two ministers are discussing, and they start making up plans, different designs for the crown, and they each come up with two different designs. We get into an argument. My design's better. My design's better. You have to put the jewels here. This kind of jewel, rubies, sapphires, diamonds. And they got into a whole argument, and they're discussing what's the advantages, the disadvantages, why mine is better than yours better than mine. Fine. So the janitor walks in, and he's sweeping the floor, and he overhears the conversation. He's listening. He's like, oh, he's a very simple guy. He walks over to them. These are two big ministers. He walks over to them, and he says, "Excuse me. I'd like to just make a suggestion. I think this minister, I think his design is much better." Just overhearing the conversation. So they both look at him like he's crazy. And they say, "Listen, buddy, thank you for the suggestion. But you have no idea what you're talking about. You know, you're a simple janitor, you do your job, you do it well, but you don't understand what's going on over here. So like you're just an outsider. You don't know what's going on." So the similar thing here. When a lot of times us as simple people, we look at these stories and we say, "Oh, they're acting improper." When the reality is we're little janitors. We don't really know what we're talking about. We don't understand such people. We look and we say, "Oh, that's something wrong. That's something bad," but we don't understand the story. We don't understand the people. Just something to keep in mind as we go along with this Haftarah, when we're talking about how Saul was this perfect, incredible person, and David was in a similar way also incredibly perfect, and we go. So before we start questioning, just keep in mind that we're simple janitors. Okay. Section B, the difference between the kings. Page 6. Sandy, can you read the symbolism of Saul and David and source 4?
Saul was a year at his reign. He ruled over Israel for 2 years. Saul chose 3,000 men from Israel, and they were with Saul. 2,000 in Michmash,
Yep.
in the mountain of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in the valley of Benjamin. And he sent the rest of the people to their tents. Rashi. Saul was a year into his reign, meaning within the year that he was crowned king and ruled over Israel for 2 years. During his first year, he immediately chose 3,000.
All right, thank you, Sandy. So that verse and that comment from Rashi might have been a little confusing. So let me just explain what it's saying. So Saul was a year at his reign. He ruled over Israel for 2 years. If it was a year at his reign, how can he rule for 2 years? What does that mean? So Rashi comes and explains that the verse is worded a little funny, but what it's saying is, and he chose 3,000 men. What the verse is saying is that he as the time of this story, he had currently ruled for 2 years, and also in his first year of his reign, he selected 3,000 men from and 2,000 in the Michmash and 1,000 from the Valley of Benjamin. Fine. So the words in this verse that we're zoning in on are the first words. In the English, it just says Saul was a year at his reign. In the Hebrew, it says Ben Shana Shaul B'milchai, which literally means Saul in his reign, he was a year old. That's the literal meaning of the verse. Guaranteed, Saul was not a year old when he became king. That would have been very, very strange. Yeah, I probably highly impractical as well. Can't understand what the king wants. You don't know. He probably wants like a toy truck. I have no idea. So let's see what the Talmud says about this. This is Talmud from the book of Yuma 22b. Elliot, can you read source 5, the whole source 5?
Read literally, the verse says that Saul was a year old when he reigned. How could this be? Huna answered, this means that during his reign, he was like a 1-year-old child who has never tasted sin. Saul was upstanding and pure. Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzhak asked on that perhaps 1-year-old implies he was constantly in a state of filth and feces. Subsequently, Rabbi Nachman had nightmares and understood it was a punishment for disparaging Saul. He said, ask forgiveness from the bones of Saul, son of Kish, whom I have offended. Again, he had nightmares and he understood that he hadn't asked for forgiveness in a sufficiently respectful manner. He said, I asked for forgiveness of the bones of Saul, son of Kish, king of Israel. And then the nightmare stopped. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, why did Saul's dynasty not continue? Because he didn't have any flaw in his lineage. It was flawless from all sides. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehozadak, community leader shouldn't be appointed without having a can of worms hanging behind him. Flawed lineage. Why? For if he exhibits a haughty attitude towards the community, one can say to him, turn around and look at where you come from. This is why David, whose lineage was of Ruth and Moabite, had a long-lasting dynasty, and Saul didn't.
Perfect. So when examining this relationship between Saul and David, we can't ignore the obvious differences between Saul's distinguished ancestry and David's, with its stain, so to speak, we'll get that in a second, of Moabite ancestry, his grandmother's Moabite roots. The Talmud says that since Saul's ancestry was flawless, his reign didn't last. Sounds kind of funny. Because it was flawless, therefore his reign didn't last. David, however, having that flaw in his lineage, merited that his reign would endure for many generations. Apparently, this flaw, quote unquote, was really an advantage. David's family history would ensure that David wouldn't be consumed by haughtiness. Okay, so yeah, fine. Page 8. How can David be denigrated? Did I say that right? Denigrated? Due to his origins. Says the Rebbe. This requires clarification. Everybody's going to ask 2 questions on this. How can it be said regarding King David, if he, quote, if he exhibits a haughty attitude toward the community, one can say to him, turn around and look at where you come from. That David had, quote unquote, flawed lineage because he was descended from Ruth, the Moabite. The question is twofold. 1, what is the flaw in being descended from Ruth? 2, it is forbidden to say to a penitent or a convert, remember your past conduct. It would have been forbidden to say something like this even to Ruth herself, and certainly to David, who was only her descendant and had no past conduct to regret. So the Rebbe makes 2 points here. 1, how can David's descent from a convert be considered a flaw? There are people who are born Jewish and people who convert and become Jewish. They're both 100% Jewish. And the fact that the person was not Jewish when they were born is not relevant. They're currently Jewish. So why is it a bad thing? I mean, seemingly it sounds like it's a bad thing. Like it sounds like it's something a problem with the fact that David's great ancestor Ruth was a convert. And therefore what? Why is it a flaw? And 2, even if we somehow see that it is a flaw, it's according to Jewish law, it's forbidden to offend a person by reminding them of their past. It's forbidden to say to a penitent, someone who repented, I Googled you and I found out about your past. Spooky, nasty, whatever. How then can David be told, turn around and look at where you come from? It's forbidden. You not talk like that to somebody who has a not good past. Okay. And source 6 is from the Talmud Bav Matzia, page 58, side B. Just as there are forbidden harmful business practices, there is also forbidden harmful speech. One may not tell a penitent, remember your prior actions. One may not tell the child of converts, remember your parents' actions. For the verse states, do not harass the convert and do not pressure them. Okay. Now, as is not typical, but it was often in the Rebbe's works, the Rebbe doesn't just answer the question. The Rebbe gives a build-up, background, an understanding, a concept, and then we use that to address the question. So, Barry, can you go to past experiences shape a person, page 9?
To explain, a convert is considered like a newborn child. However, despite being reborn, a residual effect of the past remains. Coleman says that a convert has a negative inclination and must therefore be more cautious than others. Similarly, a penitent must also be more careful. We are taught that a penitent must consider all forbidden matters as disgusting and completely undesirable. However, a person who has never transgressed is advised to have the attitude that the forbidden matters are attractive and desirable, but God has forbidden us from partaking of them. The reason the penitent is instructed to have a different attitude is so that he shouldn't, God forbid, follow the transgression.
Okay, we're gonna get to the difference between a penitent and a person who never sinned before, the difference between the two of them, how they look at things that are forbidden in a second. But could you read also source 7 from the Talmud?
Sure. Rabbi Eliezer said, why did the Torah warn 36 times, and some say 46 times, not to torment the convert? Because it may cause him to return to his past ways.
Okay, thank you. So Rabbi Eliezer teaches a very important point, that while a convert is certainly accepted as an equal and is indeed considered a reborn person, that doesn't mean that the fact that they live many years as a non-Jew and can become accustomed to a certain lifestyle is ignored. If someone, God forbid, mistreats this person, this could cause them to go back to their previous lifestyle. Mistreating a convert is forbidden due to the mitzvah to show love to converts. And we also need to take into account that this may drive them away to a bad path. The sages teach that the same principle holds true regarding our personal lives, as we'll see now. Michael, you read source 8. We're going to pause after source 8, and then we continue source 9.
Always righteous, non-kosher food is delicious, but forbidden. Rabbi Elazar ben Azara said, one should not say I'm disgusted by pork, or I cannot wear wool and linen together. Rather say I want it, but what can I do? God has forbidden it for me.
Okay, so to a person that never sinned before, we say, don't hold yourself out as a righteous person and say you have no desire at all to do anything wrong, to eat non-kosher, to wear things that are forbidden. Concede that you would like to eat it, but that you don't actually do so because God has forbidden it. So somebody who has never performed a particular sin, okay, in their environment, the way they were raised, whatever it is, circumstances. Let's say it's a person that never ever ate, like this example, I don't say shrimp. Okay, shrimp is not kosher. They never ate shrimp before, and that's how they were raised. And they grew up knowing that shrimp is not kosher, therefore we don't eat it. We don't eat shrimp in this house, and they never eat shrimp. So for them, it's not a big deal to eat shrimp. To not eat shrimp. It's okay. I've never been on my menu, and I have no desire for it. Such a person is not supposed to say, "Oh, shrimp, it's not kosher, it's disgusting." What they're supposed to say is, "It looks really good, but I'm not going to eat it because God doesn't want me to eat it. I'm not going to eat it." That's a person who has never sinned, and has never sinned it's not a blanket statement that for they've never done anything wrong. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about each particular sin, each particular area. Maybe in that particular area they've never slipped up or they've never fallen, let's say. But source 9, this is the flip side. This is a penitent. Go ahead.
Penitent, non-kosher food is disgusting. One who sinned and repented needs to constantly be on guard to not return to their past ways. One who never tasted sin needn't be as careful. This is the boundaries element of repentance. The quality element of repentance demands that for the pleasure gained from sin, the penitent feels an equal measure of remorse. But the boundaries element requires that the penitent distance themselves from an extreme from sin, lest they become tempted to sin again. God forbid. The penitent needs this more than one who hasn't ever sinned. The Maggid of Mesrich said that the Talmud statement that one must be disgusted by forbidden food is applicable only to one who has never sinned in their lifetime. However, the penitent must be very careful not to stumble again and should be disgusted by sin. In summary, one who came from a lower level needs to be extra careful even when they've risen to a higher level of righteousness.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. So, in other words, a person with a history of sin, one who has already experienced the taste of forbidden pleasures, is at a greater risk of falling for temptation again. This is why they are told you may not even verbalize that you enjoy this thing. You need to stay away from this. Here lies a gray area, where the boundaries shift from person to person and period to period. The always righteous and the penitent are different, and as a result, the expectations of them and their priorities are different. For example, both are sitting in front of a non-kosher meal, a tantalizing aroma wafting through the air. I love the descriptions here. The always righteous may say, I'd love to eat this, but forbidden. The penitent, however, must distance themselves immediately from that plate. He must negate any temptation for the forbidden foods, lest they stumble in sin. For in his mind, he can still recall those flavors. This is like someone who has successfully recovered from an alcohol addiction. They must be careful to hold back even from a sip of wine, lest they fall into addiction again. The same applies to sinning. So let's see the Rebbe's words, page 11. Some need to be extra careful. Sure.
Based on the above, we can explain that when it says regarding King David, Satan turned around, that he had broad range because he was descended from Ruth and Moabite. It was not a case of reminding the penitent of their previous conduct. Rather, it was a practical matter regarding his divine service. He needs to conduct himself like a penitent who needs to be careful. Unlike Saul, who was a righteous person, he never transgressed and didn't need to practice.
Okay, so here lies the answer to the questions we asked. David's flaw of Moabite heritage doesn't mean there's something wrong with coming from a family of converts. Not an issue. Rather, in his genes, in his DNA, there still remains the memory, it's called muscle memory or something, of his ancestors who worshipped idols, consumed non-kosher foods, and so on. Thus, he must make sure to be extra vigilant in this regard. This is what the Talmud means by the community telling David, look at your past. Remember that you have a genetic predisposition to forbidden things, and you must be extra vigilant. And this is all related to the idea of a relatable leader. So in addition to David's flawed ancestry, causing the nation to assist him in remembering his past and being more vigilant, it had another advantage. I read also this part. Yeah.
Okay. A relatable leader. This is the condition for kingship. We only appoint a leader who has humble lineage, a can of worms hanging behind him. And this is why Saul's kingship didn't be given, because he had no flaw in his lineage. Saul was a spiritual giant, and there is also an opinion that Saul is considered the original Jewish king. Nevertheless, kings of Saul's kingship did not endure because the leader of the community must suffer with the burden of the people, like Moshe Rabbeinu did. For this to be possible, the king needs to be able to relate to the level of the people. And if he's on a different spiritual plane, he cannot relate. There's a story in this game concerning the second Chabad Rebbe, the Middle Rebbe. A person asks for advice on how to correct a certain transgression that was completely foreign to the Middle Rebbe. The Middle Rebbe was unable to answer him until he located within himself an echo of his transgression, a far more refined sense. Before he found this issue within himself, he was unable to move the petitioner for his rectification. This is why we only appoint a leader of the community, a person who has a can of worms hanging behind him, because otherwise he can't relate to the entire nation.
Okay. So I think it's important to actually say this story that the Rebbe mentions here about the Mittler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, because it's just mentioned very briefly here. I was going to bring the book that is printed in, but I forgot to. But I do have a picture of the page. it's here. Here. I think it's just worth reading. It's written in Hebrew. That's written by the previous Rebbe. But I'll just translate it. In one of his trips, the Mittler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, stayed in an inn, not far from the city of Samargon. This was in the month of Menachem Av. It was in the summer. The air was very good, and the Mittler Rebbe decided to stay there for about a week. When people found out about this decision, a huge crowd of people gathered to greet him, to see him, and he was accepting people for yechidus, as was the custom. Yechidus means it's a face-to-face meeting. It's a soul meeting, really, between a Rebbe and a Chassid. And it's considered the pinnacle of their relationship. It's a special moment when the Chassid can ask the Rebbe for individual guidance and share their woes and be blessed by the Rebbe. Many Hasidim, plagued by their consciences over past failings, waited for the Rebbe to give them a personalized method of rectifying their past. We can't understand the Rebbe's side of the relationship, but it was certainly a deep soul connection with significant spiritual import. Going further in the story, just to show an idea of Yechidus. So when the Mittel Rebbe would travel, he would go with there would be great Hasidim, great people that would go with him to escort him on the road, and that's what happened with this trip also. One of the days during his stay there, middle of the day, there were hundreds of people standing, pressed together, waiting to go have that opportunity to sit with the Mittel Rebbe one-on-one for Yechidus, this incredible special opportunity. And suddenly, the Mittel Rebbe said that they should close the door, no more. And he stopped accepting the guests who were coming to see him. So the Hasidim who were standing in the courtyard and waiting to go into Yechidus, and so too the Hasidim who were busy with reviewing the Hasidic discourses that was part of the Yechidus tradition. They all thought that for sure the Mittel Rebbe is just too tired from all the traveling, and he's just going to wait a little bit, and then he'll start taking in guests again for Yechidus, just to rest up. But a half hour later, the Gabbai, how do you say Gabbai in English? Gabbai, I'll just say Gabbai. In English, these call the Gabbai the sexton. I don't know what that means. It's the guy who's dealing with the goings on in shul usually. Sexton, okay. So about a half hour later, the Gabbai, Reb Zalman, came out, and he was very disturbed, and his eyes were red from crying. And he whispered into the ears of the great Hasidim that were there. And the Hasidim, when they heard his words, they were shocked. They were turning red and white, and their faces were changing color. And they started crying. And nobody knew what was going on. After about an hour or two, some of these great Hasidim, they went to the house where the Mittel Rebbe was staying, and they heard from behind the door that the Mittel Rebbe was saying psalms, pouring out his soul with incredible crying from the very depth of his heart. Some of the Hasidim fainted from the great pain that they didn't know what was going on. It was just so scary. And why is the Mittel Rebbe this great fear? What's going on? And it was the middle of the day. It was a regular weekday. It wasn't like a special day, and it was very shocking. So those standing in the courtyard, when they heard this great noise, this great commotion, they got into groups. They gathered into groups, and they began to say their own chapters of Psalms with tears at the depth of the heart. So the Mittel Rebbe himself, when he finished saying the entire book of Tehillim, or when he finished saying the Tehillim Psalms, he began to prepare himself for the Mincha prayer, the afternoon prayer. But he was so weak from this whole episode that he needed to lay down for some time, just to rest up. Afterwards, he prayed Mincha, the afternoon service, as one does during the 10 days of repentance, which is between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It was not at that time of year. That's how he was praying Mincha. There was something going on. When the people found out about this, they decided that they were going to pray Mincha the way one prays on a fast day, because they were already fasting for whatever, various reasons. After the Mincha prayer, the Mittel Rebbe went out to the courtyard, and he got up on a platform, and he said a very heart-wrenching Hasidic discourse about sins and about negative thoughts and bad behaviors, and how saying the letters and words of Torah and saying Tehillim can help with that, and the advantage of that. And it made it a very big impression, inspiration in the people, and they remembered this incident for many years later. The next day, the Mittel Rebbe was so weak and he needed to rest, which caused a lot of pain for the people there. And they didn't know what was going on. The day after, the Mittel Rebbe began accepting people again into private audience, Yechidus. So there was a Chassid, Reb Pinchas, from the city of Shklov, who was one of the honorable Chassidim in the days of the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad. And from the elder Chassidim of those days, who would actually escort the Mittler Rebbe on his travels. After a few days, he came to the Mittler Rebbe and asked him, what was that whole story? What happened over there? So for a moment, the Mittler Rebbe became very serious. And afterwards, he answered him like this. When people come to me for Yechidus and they open up the deepest recesses of their heart, each person, wherever they're holding, each person, everything that one tells to me, they need to, it's written in third person, that's the way it's written. But the point is, when people tell me things, I need to find a similar thing in myself, at least on a minute, watered down version, a certain level, it's a very minute level. And it's impossible to give a person a path in correcting that problem, unless I first fix that in myself as well. On that day, somebody entered into Yechidus, and I was shocked to hear his words. Basically, this person told the Mittler Rebbe he had done something so awful, so disturbing. And the Mittler Rebbe wasn't disturbed that this person did something wrong. We all mess up. We're all human. The issue was that the Mittler Rebbe could not find such a thing within himself. He couldn't relate to it, and that disturbed him. Because if he can't help this person and he can't see it in himself, he's not a Rebbe. That was the main issue. So he closed the door and he said, he came out, you're disgusting, get out of here. He wanted to help this person. And he's crying and saying psalms and praying that Hashem should help him. The end of the story was that he found something in himself in his past, way years back, that on a very, 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 very minute level reflected this person's sin. Like to the craziest extreme, the two things had almost no connection. And he worked on that and he fixed that, corrected himself. Now he's able to help this person. That's what happened. And that's the idea of a true leader. A true leader is not one who's perfect, who has absolutely no relation to the people. I can't help you. You're all a bunch of bozos. I'm perfect. And, you all do some things wrong. I never do anything wrong. It's a person who can relate to the people, that understands them, understands where they're coming from. That's a true leader. Okay, continue on. Can of worms behind. Yeah, page 12.
However, this can of worms can only be hanging behind. If the negative conduct part of his character, then he cannot be a leader of the community, because he must first rectify himself. After having fully repented, he needs to turn around and see the can of worms of his past history, and this will give him the ability to influence and guide all the people, including those that are on a lowly level.
Right. So here the Rebbe adds the big but and clarifies matters. Yes, we must choose a flawed, quote unquote, leader with a less than perfect past. But the key word here is past, that the flawed past must be behind them. Okay, section C, descend to ascend. Sandy, can you read page 13, the connection between David and Jonathan and the eve of Rosh Chodesh? Now we're going to bring everything together.
The connection, okay. We can now understand the connection between the Haftarah reading of tomorrow is the new month and the eve of Rosh Chodesh. Eve of Rosh Chodesh, the moon is at its lowest point, completely invisible. Tomorrow is the new month means that this concealment will lead to renewal and revelation. The Jewish people are compared to the moon, and we're told that we will eventually be renewed like the moon. The eve of Rosh Chodesh alludes to the state of concealment that the Jewish people experience. This concealment begins with the descent of the soul into the physical body. In the words of the Reb Rayatz, a bundle of flesh, bones, and warm blood. The primary concealment is the era of exile, and specifically in the last moments of the exile before the dawn of redemption. This dark period of concealment can, God forbid, lead a person to despair. The response to his challenge is the verse Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is the new month and you will be remembered, for your seat will be empty. Jonathan is the son and heir of Saul, representing the service of the always righteous. He says to David, who represents the penitents, that you will be remembered. The dark concealment is what will lead to the great revelation. This revelation is brought about by the refinement of the animalistic soul and the physical world. the theme of repentance. Specifically, through this work, we merit the great revelation of the future redemption, which the verse describes as God's glory will be revealed, and all flesh will witness it. This means that the physical flesh will become refined to the extent that it will be able to perceive godliness. The future redemption will come about through repentance. The reading of the Haftorah empowers us to carry out our mission in the period of exile and concealment. This will lead us to the ultimate revelation that will take place in the future redemption, when my servant David will be their leader forever.
All right, thank you, Sandy. So for hundreds of years, this Haftorah has been read on the day before Rosh Chodesh. At first glance, the connection of this reading to the date of the month is merely the first verse of the Haftorah. Tomorrow is the new month. In this address, the Rebbe reveals a deeper connection between the Haftorah and the date of the month, the day before Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh symbolizes that the light that comes forth from and after the darkness. And the tale of Saul, Jonathan, and David illustrates exactly this idea. At that time, the eve of the new month, Jonathan was in a far better state than David. He was in his father's palace, sitting at a festive meal. David is running for his life. He hides far away from civilization, running from a king who wants him dead for no fault of his own. He turns his eyes heavenward on that dark night at the end of the month, and the moon is almost not visible. There isn't a ray of light to give him hope and optimism. David's circumstances resemble our own exile. We're in spiritual darkness, our souls trapped in a body of flesh and blood. It's a difficult mission to create a connection with God and to feel holiness under these circumstances. All the cards are stacked against us. But then Jonathan comes and tells David that his suffering is over. That can of worms that he carries on his back, soon he'll be the king, not Jonathan. The royal dynasty will come from David, not Saul. Our suffering in this long exile seems tiring and hopeless, but one who rises above it realizes that soon with our redemption, our hard work will pay off. Then we'll see that even the always righteous need to repent. All the difficulties, challenges, cruelty, and spiritual failings won't be for naught. For every moment of weakness, there were minutes of greatness and Jewish determination, and those are worth more than anything else. So I guess you could say in short, Jonathan and David are not just two people. They're prototypes. It's a dialogue between two different realities. There's the reality of perfection and the reality of David, which is imperfection. Let's call it. It's not the right word, but let's call it imperfection. And it's darkness and imperfection and negativity this is where it's at. Not that we should enjoy that. We should be happy that we have negativity in our life. We don't ever want negativity. But when we have negativity, when we have struggling, when we have challenges, that's where the greatest growth could happen. Just like the moon. When does the moon start shining again? After it's dark. It's the first of the month. Right before Rosh Chodesh, it looks like there's nothing. There's no light. In Yiddish, you'd say garnished. But the following night, it's going to light up and it's going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. Questions, comments? I'm waiting for the guy. Someone brings a joke to the table.
That was beautiful. Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can of worms, Torah?
What do you mean?
It was just the repetition.
So it's a phrase from the Talmud. Let's look it up.
Yeah, okay.
Let's take it for granted over here. Look on page 7. I think it was the first time it said it. Here. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadok, a community leader shouldn't be appointed without having a can of worms hanging behind him. So the idea of a can of worms is from the Talmud. It actually says, where is it? In Mamidin Parnas al Tzibur, in Kupa shel Shrotzim. Kupa shel Shrotzim means literally a box of vermin, of can of worms. It's like a more modern translation. Yeah.
Pretty full of crap.
I get it. Well, Shrutz, yeah, it could be.
Box full of crickets.
We can have fun with this.
Thank you. I was wondering, so that's from the.
That's from the Talmud, yeah.
Wow.
A lot of stuff comes from Talmud. Okay, if anybody has any more questions? If not, we're gonna end the call. All right. Thank you everyone for coming. And if you're watching on YouTube, good for you. Hope you enjoy the class. If you live in Erie, please come to the class. Like, come here. I'm talking to people on YouTube. Like, get in this room. It's a great vibe here, right? Absolutely. All right. Have a good night, Sandy.
Thank you.
All right.